Hey, thanks for joining me today for episode 60 of Podcasting Your Brand. I'm your host, producer Jaime, providing learning lessons for you to podcast your brand. And today I'm going to share a Podcasting 102 topic, structuring your podcast with monetization in mind, a virtual presentation I recently gave at the 4th annual Afros and Audio Conference. This episode is brought to you by my own brand, Flintstone Media. Listen in and let's do this. This episode is going to sound a little bit different than usual. As mentioned at the top, I recently had the honor of presenting 2 virtual presentations at the 4th annual Afros and Audio Conference's virtual track. Parlaying your podcast into a production company was one presentation, and the one you'll hear today was structuring your podcast with monetization in mind. So this is going to be me, but in total live mode. Same producer Jaime, but I am multifaceted after all. So I match the energy for the mission at hand. And in a virtual presentation setting, it's a bit different from recording a solo podcast when no one is watching, like I'm doing for this part and for the close right now. But after I turn it over to myself, you'll hear me in live producer Jaime mode. And I only edited out the pieces where the MC or the audience voices were heard, my intro at the beginning, the Q&A at the end, that sort of thing, since I didn't get specific permission to include those. And a lot of that was interactive anyways, to the point where it just wouldn't make much sense to you if I kept it in. But other than that, I pretty much just let it fly. You are going to get pure live producer Jaime. Are you ready? Are you sure? Well, let's get into it. Here is my presentation for the 4th annual Afros and Audio Conference virtual track called Structuring Your Podcast with Monetization in Mind. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who is here today. Thank you so much to Afros and Audio. This is a phenomenal community, and I'm just honored to be a part of it. So this is structuring your podcast with monetization in mind. Now, I don't know about you, but I love the ability to make some money, and podcasting is fraught with opportunity to make a lot of money if you can just figure out how to properly mine for it. It's not easy. So I'm let's say that right there. It's not easy. It takes practice and commitment, but it can definitely be done. So I've been doing this since 2014. I'm a single mother. This is all I do. So if I don't make this work, there's no roof over this head. There's no food in this belly. So it can be done. It just has to be done with a lot of hard work and dedication, but it can be done. So let's find out how it can be done. All right. So today I'm going to ask you, have you been told that you need 1,000 downloads per episode to monetize? This is a very, very common misconception. So we're going to get into why that is a very common misconception. Are you needing to offset the cost of your podcasting with financial support, or do you dream of actually making this thing profitable? Guess what? We're going to be talking today all about how you can do that by planning for the monetization that you want to have happen for you. Okay, so part 1, I'm going to give you my brief thoughts on CPM. I cannot talk about monetization without talking about CPM. And if you're like, what is CPM? I'll have that answer for you in just a second. No worries. And part 2 will be the risk of not having your table set when potential sponsors are ready to come in and dine with you. And part 3 are the different types of monetization that you can incorporate into your podcasting, various kinds that you can. And I've done almost everything over these 8 years. So we're going to dive into that. And part 4 is going to be monetization in mind at every single step. Before you even launch a show, in creating that format, monetization should be part of the game plan. And it should come up as you're planning. And then part 5 will be talking about creating your marketing assets now so that when someone does come to you, you are ready for them. Okay. So let's get into that. All right. Part 1, CPM is the devil. Okay, so what is CPM? Essentially, it's your cost per like 1,000 clicks. I almost said million, not million, but cost per 1,000 clicks. Okay. So let's say you have a show. The reason why people think you need to have a certain number of downloads, not because the CPM model says, if you get 1,000 downloads, we'll pay you $2. Okay, for those 1,000 downloads. That's not a lot of money for a whole lot of downloads. If you're an independent podcaster, you know that reaching 1,000 downloads is like climbing Mount Everest. It can be hard. And if you're putting in all the years of blood, sweat, and tears it takes to reach that 1,000 listener per episode mile marker, then how much investment have you already put in? Are you going to be exhausted by the time you get there? So the CPM model is the devil because it makes you feel like you're unworthy of receiving the fruits of your labor in due time, and you are. So first of all, it completely misses the unique power of the medium. Consumers have already self-filtered. So let's say you have a show about being fabulous in your full figuredness, right? I heard about a show like that just now. So if you have a show about that, then guess what? The people who are listening to your show, they've already raised their hands because they've gone through the podcast platform. They found your show. They subscribe to it. So they've already raised their hands and saying, we are here for this content. We are here for this information. So they have already filtered themselves into your lane. So that's a really, really strong, powerful aspect of the podcasting medium that is fairly unique to podcasting. You don't get that with television as much. You don't get that with radio as much. Magazines, not quite as much. Also misses the unique advantage of this medium. There's a really intimate relationship. When you are speaking into somebody's ear on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, you're creating a relationship with that person. And so I don't want to go on a tangent about this, but as a side note, remember to talk to that one listener, okay? And because you're able to talk to that one listener, it forms this very, very intimate, close relationship. Your listener feels like they have a chance to get to know you. And when they feel like they have a chance to get to know you, they're trusting you to give them really good information. But they're also trusting you for a lot of other things, to build a community that's a safe space, for example. They might be trusting you that what the sponsors that you do put in front of them are going to be sponsors that they want to listen to. So there's a lot of trust that goes into the power of podcasting, and that can be capitalized on. And another thing that the CPM model misses, and this is key, it prevents the formation of a strong relationship between yourself and a potential sponsor. Because if all the sponsor cares about is the number of ears listening in, they're missing the point. They're missing that those ears have self-filtered. They're missing that those ears are really, really trusting you. It's very different than casting out, a wide net, let's say with a radio ad, and just hoping that enough people who might be interested in your day spa or whatever are listening at that exact moment. They're not changing the dial when the commercial come up. Oh my goodness, right? It's a big wish. So you have to cast a big net. Whereas with podcasting, again, because they self-filtered, the net can be like a laser target. And that's really, really powerful. And because of that, you can have your sponsor be involved with the show, be involved with the sponsorship, become part of the content, and create that relationship with your listeners as well. So there's so much that the CPM model misses because all it boils things down to is a number at the end of the day. And that number means nothing. 1,000 downloads for a show, a general sports show, isn't going to be very impressive. 1,000 downloads for, I don't know, an owl spotting show would be amazing, right? So it's not just about the number. It's about the impact of that number on that potential audience for that potential sponsor. All right, moving on. CPM's the devil. Okay, CPM is the devil. I think I made my point. All right, part 2. What is the risk of not having your table set? What do I mean by that? Think about, imagine if it's like Thanksgiving dinner and it's happening at your house and you're the one who's in charge of all the things. And everyone, the invitations went out wrong and everyone shows up like 4 hours early. I mean, panic attack ensues, right? You don't have a turkey, you don't have any sides, you don't have any clean plates, you don't have the table side, and nothing's ready. And all these people are coming in and they're ready to eat and you have nothing to serve them. So there's a lot of risk if you have sponsors who are ready to eat at your table and you've got nothing to serve them. So what's that risk? You're going to lose opportunities, obviously, right? For that particular sale, but it goes way beyond that too. Because if you don't have your table set, if you're not prepared, you can't look really professional. You're going to look like you're scrambling and that you don't know what you're doing. Okay. Remember, and you're going to hear me say this a couple of times. A potential sponsor is trying to give you money. That is money that in their eyes, whether truthful or not, they've worked really, really hard for. They want to know that you're going to value those dollars and work really, really hard for them as well. So if they come to you and you're scrambling like, yeah, we can have a conversation and I think I can offer you something and I don't know what it's going to be, then they're not going to take you seriously and they're not going to want to do business with you. Also, if you don't have your table set and you do miss that opportunity on that particular sale, it's not just about that one sale, because this is true for business of all sorts. Once you have a customer, it's about that customer's retention and making them a repeat customer, right? But if they don't become a customer the first time, they can't be repeat customers. So you're going to miss out on that opportunity if you don't have your table set. In fact, Horse Radio Network, where I'm a manager, they have lots of really solid sponsors, but there's one in particular who's been with them for 10 years. Really solid relationship. Now imagine 10 years ago, if when that person approached them, if they didn't have their cards on the table, they didn't have their ducks in a row, they would have missed out on 10 years of ongoing revenue. Don't let that happen to you. Also, you want to build momentum for future sponsorships. There is a certain thing called FOMO, and it is real, okay? When a sponsor is listening to your show and they hear another ad on there, they're like, I want that ad spot. It's kind of like when you're driving down the road and you see one of those bus stop benches, and it says, your ad here, or see it works, or made you look, or whatever those things say that kind of prove the point that, you know, there's advertising there that's going to work. Same thing. When a potential sponsor hears another sponsor on your show, it builds momentum. It causes FOMO. They want to get involved. So you don't want to miss out on that first sale because it misses out on lots of other things. There's a domino effect. Okay. So my question for you is, if somebody approached you today and wanted to sponsor you today, would you be ready? And if you don't think you'd be ready, what do you think you would need to get ready? We're going to cover that, by the way. Okay, so types of monetization. This is key for me to explore with you because I want you to think beyond just your typical pre-produced sponsorship ad. Just an ad spot. There's so many other ways to monetize your podcast. And unless we explore that, the rest of the conversation about structuring your podcast for monetization doesn't make any sense. So let's first talk about the types of monetization that you can actually incorporate into your show. Okay. So obviously, podcast-based exposure is the most clear one. It's the low-hanging fruit. So you can have those pre-produced ads. We do them all the time. There's nothing wrong with them. Don't want to poo-poo them. They're great. They're easy to sell. Okay. Everyone's familiar with them. But there's a lot more than that. You can also have host-read ads. So the difference is a pre-produced ad usually it's pre-produced, right? So it's somebody's recorded it. It's been edited. There's been maybe music beds added, something of that nature. Host-read ads are done within the context of the episode. And so it could be that they literally take a moment and say, I'm going to mention our sponsor here for a minute, blah, 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 right? It could be that it's just talked about. It's just discussed as the conversation. And so let's say there's a sponsor who does, I don't know, RVs, right? And they sponsored a show. And so the host then mentions their trip over the weekend using their RV. Right? It doesn't come across as an ad, but it is. It's a host-read ad. There can also be sponsored show segments. So if you ever hear the radio and you hear this segment is sponsored by, or traffic brought to you by, blah, 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 same thing. Okay. So you can have a segment of your show that you then are keying up and teeing up for potential sponsors. So, for example, on the Podfest podcast, we used to have a segment for trivia, and so that trivia segment was sponsored by Jonathan Oakes of Trivial Warfare. And so we basically had a segment specifically that he was participating in, but it was good value for our listeners as well. And I'll get into why that is the most important thing. You can also do product highlights and reviews. Now, there's the most obvious one of, Sally's Saddle Company makes wonderful saddles, and we got to test them out and had a great time and fit our horse and blah, 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 right? Typical host product review. It can also be something where, again, it's just part of your natural conversation. It could also be something that you're doing in real time, and usually microphones, that kind of thing. So if you say, if you feel like I sound wonderful today, then I just want to let you know I'm using a Tascam TM70 microphone. So within the context, right? Within the context of what you're doing. If you have a show on sewing, then you can talk about the iron that you used that day and how great it was, or the starch or whatever it is. Okay. I have actually a friend who has a show on ironing. So that's why it's top of mind. You can also have sponsors be ongoing content contributors. This means that they either come into your show and participate in the segment with you, or even take over a segment. So I'll give you an example. One show that I produce is the Florida Beer Podcast. And one thing that I really would love to do with them, because it comes up all the time. It's a very B2B show. And he interviews brewers, and the audience are mostly brewers or brewer wannabes, learning about how it's done. And so for that show, a lot of the conversation ends up dipping into the legalities of things, which are unbelievably complicated when it comes to craft beer. I would have never known had I not listened to a million episodes of the show. So one of the things we're thinking about doing is reaching out to a craft beer lawyer, an alcohol lawyer, and having them come on for a sponsored segment every month, maybe 5 minutes, and just talk about a cornerstone concept, legal concept that every brewer should know, right? What's that key legal tip of the week or whatever, tip of the month, right? So they know that they're getting that exposure to that, again, pre-filtered audience who's raised their hand and said, we want all this B2B craft brewery stuff that includes legal information. Now, when potential future brewer, I'm deciding to open a brewery, I need a lawyer. I'm not going to go scouting around and considering options and thinking about things. No, I'm going to go straight to the lawyer I heard on the podcast that I love so much. No questions asked, okay? So they can be ongoing content contributors. So lots of different ways within the podcast to have sponsorships incorporated. Doesn't just have to be pre-produced ads. I want to make sure that was really, really clear today. You can also have links in the show notes, by the way. And actually, for everybody who's a sponsor on your show, you should have a link to them in their show notes, and you should always mention that, okay? Now, you can also have other kinds of digital exposure. So banner ads on your website can be a great thing to add on to your monetization packages. You can also have social media posts. So for each episode that they sponsor, if they know that you're going to be posting that episode on Instagram and mention sponsored by so-and-so, or you do a special ad, a special post for that sponsor on your social media pages. You can also do e-blast content. So let's say you have a really strong, really big newsletter audience, then that is super valuable. They know that that's being in their inbox, especially if you can prove that you have really good click-through rate and all that kind of stuff. So you can offer them placement within your e-blast as well. Okay, that doesn't end there. There's still more to go. There are lots of different ways to monetize. You can also monetize your own business sales. Now, this should not be minimized, because this can actually be a massive way to monetize your show. And a lot of the clients that I work with, in fact, the niche that I produce for, typically, they're all business owners, and they're utilizing their podcasts as a tool to gain exposure for their brand or their business. So within that, sometimes their business is the main sponsor of the show. For example, we have a show I produce called The Accidental Landlord, and it's done by a property management company. So that show is sponsored by Rincon Property Management. So they sponsor their own show. But the idea is that as people then listen to a podcast about property management, they're interested in, about property investment. They're interested in doing that, but they need someone to manage the property. So they listen to the show. They realize that the people behind the show do that, and they form this like and trust with them already. So that sales cycle shrinks down. So they're able to then, similarly to a listener picking up the phone for the alcohol lawyer without even thinking about looking up anybody else, same thing. They're going to reach out to Rincon about managing their property because they are listening to their podcast and they have all this information and they're clearly knowledgeable and I like them. So you can definitely monetize your own business sales. So if you have products or services, that's one thing. If you have books and courses, in fact, if you don't have books and courses, you should consider how you can repurpose your content from your podcast into books and courses that you then sell on your show. Okay, so that's going to be something else that you do to monetize through your podcast. And then you can have community-based monetization as well. And that can look like membership paywalls. The most commonly known is Patreon, but there are a lot of different options out there. But essentially what this is it's a website, it's a space where the only way that they can participate in that community is by paying the membership fee, which is, monetized through your podcast. So that community could be, for example, the Horse Radio Network has a phenomenal community. They're all just horse lovers. That's what they want to be in there for. Talk about horses all day long, but they have to pay to be part of that community. Other people do it where, let's say they have I have a client who has a business where she helps women acknowledge that they're not feeling okay and to stop faking fine and instead acknowledge what the real problems are and help grow and develop. So she has a lot of coursework and paperwork and documentation and things to offer on self-development and growth and all those kinds of things. So she offers that stuff through a monthly membership fee that she promotes through her podcast. And then you can also do in-person events. Now, these are a little less common, but they can work out. And so let's say you have a podcast that speaks to the fashion industry. Then you can go and you can get a booth or go to a fashion industry conference, those kinds of things, and just mingle and get to know people there. And you might end up shaking hands with somebody who wants to be your next best sponsor. And you can also do virtual events with sponsors. This is actually a lot of fun. So one of the things that I like to do is if there's a sponsor who's really involved with the value add of the show, then get them to share something on that on Facebook Live or on Instagram Live. Invite them to do something with you as an extra bonus content for your audience. And they're paying to be part of that opportunity because they're part of that platform with you. So you're giving them that space. So virtual events can also be something that you incorporate into your sponsorship packages. So again, a lot of different options for monetizing your show. So the question now that I have for you, so what type of monetization do you want to focus on? I have done everything from pre-produced ads, host-read ads, in-person events, all kinds of things. What kind of monetization do you want to focus on? And what you really want to consider is what is going to resonate with your listeners? What are they going to want to either themselves buy into, or what are the kind of things that you can set up with a sponsor that is going to resonate with your listeners? So what kind of monetization do you want to focus on? Okay, part 4. This is really the good stuff of today's presentation. You want to think about monetization at each and every single step of the way. And that starts, by the way, when you're getting ready to launch. So if you don't have a show yet, even you can plan for your monetization of your future episodes. You can plan for your monetization of your day 1 episode. In fact, my own personal rule, and this is just me, it took me a while to figure out how to get here, but I personally don't launch a show unless I have a sponsor. I don't have time to put ever do unless I have a sponsor. So how do you do that? How do you find somebody to sponsor your show from literally when you're launching? Are you crazy, producer Jaime? Yes, I'm nuts, but it's done. It gets done. In fact, we just sold a launch sponsorship last week for a show. So it can be done. So how do you do it? Well, you want to look within your own ecosystem. Okay. There are people right around you who are the most apt to want to support you early on. So who can those people be? Where can you find them? Well, you want to look in your different ecosystems. Okay. Your business network. So if you have a brand or business already, let's say you have a jewelry line. So who are your current customers? What are the stores that you currently sell to or have your products, showcased at, all that kind of stuff. So what is your current business network? Who are people who you lean on because they're in the jewelry industry too, and you just talk to each other? The business network. Then your personal network. So this is your family, your friends, people who you just know have your back. If you're in a sorority or fraternity, that would be your personal network as well. Then it's going to be your industry network. So that can be things like any conferences that have to do with the audience that you speak to. So if I had a show about, fishing. Okay, I don't have a show about fishing. Let's say I had a show about fishing. Then my industry network could be, anybody who creates products and services for the fishing industry, products and services for the boating industry, for even the vacation industry, I could even say. And so I would think about conferences that are created for fishing. I would think about fishing lines, fishing lures, just really go nuts, brainstorming all the different brands and businesses in the industry. Brands, businesses, conferences, awards groups, associations, anything and everybody in your industry is a potential launch sponsor. Okay. Why? Because they're already going after, there are two reasons. They're already going after and believing in the same mission as you are. So let's say you have a history podcast and you find a great museum. Well, they're aligned with you for that mission. But the second reason is, and this becomes part of the pitch, is that if they can be on your first initial episodes, then every single listener who discovers your show down the line, they're going to dip into your back catalog and they're going to hear that ad. It doesn't go away. It lives forever. It's embedded in the audio. So there you go. That industry network is going to be able to know that they have the potential to capitalize on that ongoing exposure over time at a very, very cheap starting price point, most likely. And also your local network, even if your show isn't geolocal based, like you don't have a show about a particular location, doesn't matter. You are about a particular location and your place, your town, your city, they want to celebrate people who are local and doing really cool things. Okay. So look at your local network. So local television, news, print, magazines, anything like that, local bloggers, who is putting content out there about your area that you might be able to hook up with. They might want to do a story just on the fact that you have this cool podcast idea and what you're doing. Or they could be somebody that you have as an initial guest who helps spread the word and you're able to maybe interview them in person, which creates that closer bond. Your local network also could include things like meetup groups that service the kind of audience you're going after. So as an example, I'm thinking about the lady who I know who has a show about sewing. So let's say there was a meetup group in her area that was all about sewing, where men and women get together and they crochet, they sew, whatever. But those are all people who are ripe to be her audience, but also they could be great for potential sponsorship. One of those ladies in that sewing group, that meetup group, might have a craft store that she sells her product at. You don't know, right? So look at your local network. Again, local media and also local groups like associations, meetups, that kind of stuff. Those can all be potential launch sponsors. And then finally, your online network. So anybody in your social media. So these lists, trust me, they get very long when you really dedicate yourself to putting them together. But your online network is the last one. And so anybody, in your social media that you interact with a lot. I run a lot of clubhouse rooms. So anybody who I know comes into my clubhouse rooms quite often, or I participate in theirs, they'd be on that list as well. So your online network as well. Now, I go into this a lot in great depth about how to find potential people to sponsor you from your launch on my episode 35 of my show called Podcasting Your Brand. I don't self-promote very often, but I do when I feel like it would be super valuable. And so for this point in particular, take a deeper dive with me on episode 35 of Podcasting Your Brand. You can find it at podcastingyourbrand.com. Alrighty. And then also consider your launch format in terms of how you're going to be monetizing. What do I mean by that? Well, you want to keep your format fairly simple to start. You might have an aspirational format for every client that I work with when we're developing their show. We have this format that we're likely aspiring to, but we keep it simple to start for a couple reasons, just to get your feet wet and get used to it, but also because you want to leave room for evolution. The show should be able to evolve, number one, because you're going to evolve. Number two, because your audience is going to evolve. Your listeners are going to tell you what they want to hear from you. But also, you need to leave room for opportunities with sponsors as they come in, as you meet people. It could create opportunities to have a certain segment, like, for example, that beer law segment that I might potentially do would be one that I'm leaving room for by keeping it simple to start. This next point is so key. I cannot emphasize it enough. I was trying to think, should I put like stars around this bullet point? What should I do? You need to make sure that whether you're launching now or you've been launched and you're considering monetization, you want to take it seriously, you have to be consistent. That's number one. The reason you have to be consistent is because if your potential sponsor is trying to put dollars in your hand, again, they're working hard for their dollars. They want to know that you're going to be putting those dollars to good use. So they may have a whole marketing plan surrounding your ads being pushed out at certain dates. So being able to predict when those ad spots are going to occur is key. Let's say, for example, okay, so I do a show for Podfest podcast. So they do conferences as well. But let's say for Afros and Audios, annual conference, right? Boom, coming up. You want them to be your sponsor? Fantastic. You better know when your release dates are leading up to Afros and Audio so that you can predict what those are going to be, so they can say what scripts they want a month out and then what scripts they want 2 weeks out or 3 months out, whatever it is. They can predict that based on your consistent release schedule. So consistency is key. And the second part of this bullet point is your audio quality. I know that especially as you're getting started, it can be hard to figure out how to get the best audio quality. It doesn't have to be pristine. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be the best that you can make it. And starting with the equipment that you already have, make sure you truly know your microphone. Where should you be talking? Should you be talking on the side? You're talking at the top. Where should your mouth be in relation to your microphone? That can affect your audio quality. It will affect your audio quality. What's the space that you're podcasting in? I apologize. My cat found a toy. So she was messing around a few minutes ago. So if I had any audio quality, blame the cat. But my point is your space needs to be really, really good. Anything that you can do to control your audio quality and improve it is going to make you much more likely to land that sale. Again, these sponsors giving you their hard-earned dollars, they want to know that those dollars are going to go far. And the best audio quality you can have, the more likely you are to land that sale. And that starts from the beginning. So in the very, very beginning of your show, again, it doesn't have to be hundreds of dollars worth of equipment. You can have a very, very, very modest budget. It's about knowing your equipment and making the best use out of it. Okay. And then think that how many different ways that you can involve a sponsor in the celebration of your launch. Oh my goodness. This is part of the reason why sponsors love launching various shows that I do, because we have a really good time and we over deliver every single time. So they might, for example, obviously they have their spots in the ad spots in the show, but then also we're talking about them. We're going giddy over them in the context of the conversation on the podcast. Then we surprise them with an audiogram or some other special post that we do on social media. Then we might invite them to do a Facebook Live with us in our Facebook group of super fans, or we will put them a mention for them in our e-blast. Like, how many different ways can you get your initial sponsor involved with your launch? Having a banner ad on your website, just all different. Can you have them do anything on their social media that celebrates the launch of the show that you then repurpose on your social media, or vice versa? Get them involved as many different ways as possible to make it really, really exciting about the launch of this show. Okay. Or just being involved. Let's say you've already launched, being involved with your show. Okay. Now, so we talked about the launch kind of session. Now let's talk about ongoing sponsorships. Okay. So again, you want to look in your ecosystem, same list of places, your business network, personal network, all those things, industry network, same ecosystem. Then who else can be your potential sponsor? I want to introduce you to one of my favorite things, the Venn diagram. Now, most of you have probably heard of the Venn diagram, but in case you haven't, this is essentially what one looks like. And so your show is the yellow circle. Okay. Your show's listener base, your audience is the yellow circle. Your potential sponsor, potential sponsors, potential customers, ideal customers, that's the blue circle. Okay. The ideal relationship is when those circles overlap, and that space in the middle, that green, is the entire thing. That's ideal. As much of that overlap as you can. So as closely as you can match your audience with a potential sponsor's ideal customer, the better you are, more likely you are to land that sale, because you can sell it as such. Again, it's about telling them, everyone who listens to my show, they self-filtered. They're all your potential audience. You might think 100 downloads of a show isn't, it's not that impressive. You might be down on yourself, but it really is when you think about it. Imagine if you tell a sponsor, I'm going to put you in a room where there are going to be 100 people who are your potential clients with money in their pockets wanting to buy your products and services. Would you do it then? Would you participate then? Of course they would. 100 people were their best ideal clients? Yes. It's all about how you frame it, right? But that's the beauty of podcasting and the power of this space. And so you have to think about who you're going to go after as a potential sponsor, who is their audience, who is their customer base that's going to overlap so well with your audience base. That is where the gold is in finding ongoing sponsors. And last but not least, you want to have an ongoing format for these sponsorship situations. So again, it should evolve over time and be responsive to yourself as you evolve as a podcaster, responsive to your listener base as they evolve as an audience, but also responsive to potential opportunities that may come your way. I'll give you an example. One of the shows that I produce is called Horses in the Morning. It's on the Horse Radio Network, over 3,000 episodes. It's the longest running daily podcast. It's kind of ridiculous. I never met, if you want to talk about crazy horse people, listen to Horses in the Morning. But anyways, they have, this was actually a couple of years ago that they did this, where there was an author she writes books that are all fictional books that all have all the stories centered around horses in some way, usually mysteries. So anyway, so she wanted to work with Horse Radio Network on promotion. So on this Horses in the Morning, what they decided to do was add in a segment where I think it was once a week, if I remember correctly, once a week, they would read another chapter of the book at the end of the episode of the show, or half a chapter, depending on how long the chapter was. But they'd read the chapter. Why? Because it created this excitement, and people were like, well, I don't want to wait next week to find out what happens. I'm going to go buy the book. Okay. So, but they were able to be responsive at this opportunity to have this author be a sponsor and create a segment to maximize the goal and opportunity for them both of them. So your format needs to be you need to be open-minded enough to have flexibility to let these kinds of things happen. But the key concern, no matter what you're doing in podcasting, monetization or not, you have to remember, be consistent and be professional. For the 800th time, I think, so far today, I'm going to say, that the sponsors are working really, really hard for their money. Put yourself in their shoes, right? If they see that you're not very consistent, if they see that you don't put out good quality and you're not very professional, they're not going to want to give you their money. So you have to do both, okay? And how can a sponsorship impact your format in a positive way? So think about what ways can a sponsor add the kind of value that your listeners are looking for. Going back to my example of the alcohol attorney, that would be really good value for the listeners. Going back to the example of the horsey author, right? The fictional storytelling added good value for people who are just general horse enthusiasts. So think about how a sponsor can add value to your show. What you don't want to do is invite a sponsor in who's going to chip away at that trust of the content value that your audience has come to expect from you. And so if you have a sponsorship that feels so out of left field that it can really turn your audience off, and I'll just say this because we heard it. When we tried to run a mattress ad on Horse Radio Network, we heard it from our audience. So you want to keep that in mind. How is that sponsor going to add to the value of your show? Not just monetarily, but content-wise as well for your audience. And different structures can create different opportunities. So what value can a sponsor add to an existing segment? So if you have a segment, let's say that's somewhat like a trivia segment or something of that nature, can a sponsor then provide the gift, the prize for that segment? Like, can we turn a trivia segment where you just ask your co-hosts a funny question and they have to try to figure it out? Can you turn that into a question you pose to the audience that they can maybe win a prize, right? So what value can a sponsor add to an existing segment you already have on your show? And what segments can you create for the sponsor? So in the example I shared a moment ago with what we did with, her name was Lisa Wysocki, that author. We created that segment for her to then read. Actually, no, it wasn't her. It was the co-host, Jaime, read the next chapter of that book. We didn't have a book segment of the show, but we created it and it worked beautifully. Okay, so what structures can you actually have a sponsor elevate? And what structures can you add in for the sponsorship? And also, sometimes the best ideas that you can come up with come from collaborating with your sponsor on the idea in the first place. So there are a lot of times where I think there's something there. There's something that can be done here. I'm not exactly sure what it is. Don't wait or rely on just your own creative juices. Give that person a call. Say, this is who I am. This is the show I have. I see your service. I see your product. I see what you're doing. We so align. Can we just have an exploratory call just to see what we might be able to come up with? And sometimes the idea that the sponsor has is fantastic. And it also can be great because they're thinking outside the box. They're not podcasting on a regular basis. So sometimes it takes somebody just to step away to really see all the potential. So my first question on this part for you is, do you know your audience well enough to know who they are the ideal customers for? Do you know your audience? And the second question that I want you to be thinking about is, who in your ecosystem can you reach out to be your first sponsor? You don't have to wait for them to come to you. You already have an ecosystem of people you interact with on a regular basis who are dying to support you. Who can you reach out to today? Okay, so let's get into creating assets for sponsor sales. We're going to do that really quickly here because you want to do it now. Okay, you want to do it now. You want to create assets that showcase your podcast, like your website, a landing page for your show. You can have a one sheet or media kit, and that's essentially, it's like a PDF with information about you, about your show, about your audience, right? That's what the sponsor wants to hear and wants to see. You can put a sizzle reel together, which essentially are clips and highlights from your show sewn together to show off the best of the best moments, highlight you as a host, highlight your guest content, something of that nature. I would say keep the sizzle reel as a whole, no longer than 5 minutes, each clip about a minute or two, and you can put one together. And you want to have ad samples ready. You might think, but I don't have a sponsor. Then make one up. Make one up. In fact, you can create an ad for your own business. That's how I did. My first few ads were for Flintstone Media. Okay. Create and have your own show if you don't have one and use that as an example. And then you want to make sure you have your documents ready too. So package details. So think about right now, the kind of monetization you want to lean into, what kind of packages you can put together, what those price points might look like. You want to have a template ready for a proposal. So when that sponsor comes to you and you have an initial conversation about what you can do together, then you can plug that information into that template and send it away. Again, it makes you look super professional. You're more likely to land the sales and be able to charge those higher value dollars. You also want to have a template for your contract. Contract. Make sure these people are going to pay you for your time, okay? So I want to show you an example. If you go to floridapodcastnetwork.com/sample ads, it'll drop you onto this part of the website. You can see some ad samples that I've put up, and you can do the same thing. Once you create a couple of ads, again, they don't have to be real ones. Whatever you do, these happen to be real. You don't have to be real ones. You can make up ads, create them, put them up on your website as samples. Have all of this ready to go. So my question for you, which assets do you need to create today to set your sponsorship table? Do you need to create your website? Do you need to create a packages document, right? Do you need to create your contract template? What do you need to create today? Alrighty. So let's just quick rundown and overview again. Part 1, CPM is the devil. Part 2, there's a true risk in not having your table set for monetization when you start. Part 3, we talked about all the different types of monetization that you can have. Part 4, keeping monetization in mind at every step. And part 5, create your marketing assets now so you have them on hand and ready to go. And again, these slides will be available for you after my presentations. You can just email me, but you've got this, okay? You can structure your podcast with monetization in mind. Thank you guys. Bye. Best of luck. Keep in touch. Thank you again to the crew at Afros and Audio. If you'd like the slides that I used in delivering this presentation I shared today, please email me at Jaime, Jaime, at flintstonemedia.com, and I'll be happy to send them your way. And there was so much more detail. As much as I shared, there was so much more detail that I could have gotten into, really, truly diving into the weeds on a few of those lessons there. So I'll probably be finessing this presentation for future speaking gigs, but also I plan on including some deeper dives into these lessons for you, my dear listener, on future episodes. But be sure you check out the Afros and Audio community and get involved in their next conference. Just head to afrosandaudio.com today. And as a quick mention, be sure that you are monetizing your expertise on the OWL app, spelled with 2 W's and 2 L's. Aside from monetizing through your podcast, you can monetize through the OWL app. Let people pick your brain after they first pick their payment method. Sign up with my referral code PL954123 and you'll get your $10 credit. And we started rolling out episodes of my other show made for the OWL app brand, the OWL Podcast, also spelled with 2 W's and 2 L's. Super creative. So be sure to look that show up and subscribe so you can connect, learn, and grow as we help you better develop your expertise. But did you know that I also co-host another podcast? Well, I do. I co-host the Podfest podcast with my dear friend, Glenn the Geek Hebert, founder of the Horse Radio Network. The Podfest podcast is the official show from Podfest Multimedia Expo. Founded by Chris Krimitsos, Podfest is the largest podcasting conference for independent podcasters in the United States. And Glenn and I present each episode of the Podfest podcast as a mini Podfest conference experience filled with lessons from past Podfest speakers, some of the best podcasters in the industry. So head over to podfestpodcast.com for those episodes, podcasting tips, and community. That's podfestpodcast.com. And I'll put a link in the show notes for you as well. And the next in-person Podfest conference is happening in January. Come meet me in Orlando. Head to podfestexpo.com for tickets. And in the meantime, until you get to meet me in person or connect with me on the Owl app, I have a whole host of free tips for you on my website. Just check out flintstonemedia.com/free tips. Thanks for tuning in to Podcasting Your Brand. In this chapter of the show, I'm revealing how you can harness the power of podcasting to expand your brand. So come and pick up what I've been putting down since 2014. Avoid common mistakes and propel your podcasting and branding forward. And if you have questions or are interested in becoming a sponsoring brand of this show, don't be shy. Reach out to me at Jaime, spelled Jaime, at flintstonemedia.com. It's producer Jaime signing off for now. Remember, the only thing more powerful than your voice is your spirit to use it. So turn that mic on. Money, 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 money.